Welcome, gentle listener. As the day draws to a close and the quiet of night settles gently around you, allow your mind to drift backward through time. Settle into your pillow, breathe deeply, and imagine a world much slower. Much quieter world lit by flickering candlelight and warmed by the scent of wood smoke. There were no machines humming gently in the background, no quick cycles or fragrant dryer sheets. There were hands, strong and weathered. Water cold and drawn from deep wells or bubbling streams. Soap sharp and handmade from ashes and animal fat. Fabrics thick with use and stained with honest labor. Washing clothes was a domestic endeavor that shaped the rhythms of households and communities alike. So let us begin, slowly and softly, with this quiet tale of soap suds and sun-dried linens. Tonight, we journey to the 17th century, not for kings or queens, not for battles or thrones, but for laundry. Yes, laundry. The simple, endless rhythm of washing, scrubbing, soaking, drying, the quiet heartbeat of daily life that went mostly unnoticed, but never unneeded. In the 1600s, laundry was not just a chorette, was a ritual, an event, a day-long or even days-long process. There were no machines humming gently in the background, no quick cycles or fragrant dryer sheets. There were hands, strong and weathered. Water, cold and drawn from deep wells or bubbling streams. Soap, sharp and handmade from ashes and animal fat. In a modest cottage nestled among England's green hills, or beside a slow-moving river in France. The woman of the house, or perhaps a servant girl, or even a traveling washerwoman, would stir from bed before the cocks crow, wrapping herself in woolen shawls against the morning chill. The laundry tub, a large, sturdy wooden basin, waited patiently outside, or perhaps in a smoky scullery next to the fire. It stung the hands and left behind a sharp, clean smell. Soap was cut into chunks and dropped into the steaming water, where it slowly dissolved, curling into cloudy swirls. Let your mind rest here. In the warmth of the hearth, the sound of water sloshing, and the soft cadence of a forgotten morning. More awaits, but for now, just breathe and drift slowly through the steam. Fabrics thick with use and stained with honest labor. One cloth at a time, plunged into water, wrung out, beaten against a wooden board or stone slab. She hummed softly, perhaps, or listened to the rhythm of dripping water and the whisper of wind. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest. And it was necessary. A child or two might be sent down the path to the well with clanging pails, or to the riverbank, where mist curled along the surface and reeds whispered in the breeze. Water was drawn and poured, splashed and spilled, and it took time, so much time, to fill the great basin. Then came the heating, a slow, careful process over open flames. Great iron kettles were suspended above fire pits, and the water inside would steam and bubble as the fire crackled below. Washing clothes was a domestic endeavor that shaped the rhythms of households and communities alike. Fine garments were often brushed and aired, rarely washed. But the everyday linens, the undergarments, the children's tunics, the dishcloths and aprons, these were scrubbed and soaked with care. Delicate hands examined each item for stains. Grass, ash, spilled ale, the green smudge of herbs from the garden. Every piece held a memory of its wearer's daily life. So let us begin, slowly and softly, with this quiet tale of soap suds and sun-dried linens. The sun had only just begun to rise above the tree line when laundry day began in earnest. The first task was water. This meant buckets, dozens of them. While the water heated, the laundry was sorted. There were no vibrant colors. Then clothes were mostly of linen and wool, in whites and browns, grays and faded blues. Now the soap. In the 17th century, soap was not fragrant and gentle, it was harsh and handmade, boiled from leftover kitchen grease and lye rendered from wood ash. And so, as birds chirped outside and smoke wound lazily from chimneys, the washerwoman would roll up her sleeves and begin. And so the day began, not with trumpet calls or royal proclamations, but with warm water, stiff soap, and the rustling sound of linen being laid gently into the tub. Let your mind rest here, in the warmth of the hearth, the sound of water sloshing, and the soft cadence of a forgotten morning. More awaits, but for now, just breathe and drift slowly through the steam. As the first golden light of dawn crept softly through the wooden shutters of a 17th century cottage, the washwoman stirred beneath a woolen blanket, the air still cool and laced with a faint scent of smoke from the hearth. The cottage, with its low beams and earthen floor, held a quiet stillness that seemed to listen. She moved carefully, mindful not to wake her sleeping children, and stepped into the early hush of the morning. The world outside was wrapped in mist, and the trees stood like quiet watchers in the distance. Outside, dew clung gently to blades of grass, and birds chirped drowsily, as if they too were hesitant to begin the day. The washboard, a new invention for some, was not yet common. Chickens clucked softly from their coop, the dog lay in a lazy heap nearby, and the baby, now awake, gurgled happily in his cradle as the older children helped wring out the garments, twisting them until water ran in streams down their arms. Most still used wooden paddles or simply their knuckles, rubbing cloth upon cloth, coaxing out the dirt. The stains of the week were washed away, and with it, a piece of the week's burden. There was comfort in that. In seeing the white of a shirt returned, the smell of smoke replaced with soap. The feeling of hands tired not from worry, but from work that held meaning. And the garments, now dripping and clean, were pegged up one by one with carved wooden pins. They swayed gently in the breeze like flags of a quiet kingdom, sleeves fluttering, linens dancing, and underthings billowing softly like the sails of forgotten ships. Froth rose up like a quiet tide, and the air filled with a clean, soapy sharpness that mingled with smoke and wind. A fire had to be built beneath the pot and the water drawn from the well nearby. She leaned against the fence, closed her eyes, and let the warmth of the sun fall over her face. The air was rich with the scent of wet linen and early summer grass. And in that moment, between the soaking and the hanging, the world felt still and good. The pail, made of oak staves bound with iron hoops, was heavy even when empty. Each trip to the well was slow, steady, and wet with effort, her hands reddened by the cold handle and damp rope. Yet there was no rush. Wash day was a sunlit journey that would last from early light until the shadows of evening grew long and slanted. It was wash day, a ritual that came not with glamour, but with rhythm, patience, and an old sort of wisdom passed from mother to daughter. She rose slowly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, the fabric worn yet comforting, like a familiar friend. In the yard, the wooden washtub waited beside the large iron cauldron, its surface kissed by the early fog. It was harsh on the skin and rough on delicate cloth, but it served its purpose. There was also ash lye made by pouring water through wood ashes, a pale and smoky liquid that bubbled up in the washtub and whispered of hearth fires and winter stories. Inside, the linens were sorted, not by colors or fabrics, but by need. The tablecloth stained with mead, the children's smocks soiled with mud, the husband's work shirt crusted with earth and sweat. Each piece of cloth carried a memory, a spill, a laugh, a tumble through the hay. And now, each would be reborn, if only for a little while, through suds and labor. Soap was not the perfumed bar of modern shelves, but a rustic blend of lye and fat, often made at home during slaughtering season. With water heated and linen soaking, the work began. It was not the frantic scrubbing of machines, but the steady rhythm of hands and boards. As the morning lengthened, the backyard transformed into a space of wet labor and sunlit grace. Then came the hanging. A rope strung between two trees served as a clothesline. Wash day was long, toilsome, and tender. It was not just about cleansing the cloth, but resetting the household's rhythm. As the sun rose higher and steam curled from the cauldron like ghostly tendrils, the washwoman paused for a moment. She leaned against the fence, closed her eyes, and let the warmth of the sun fall over her face. The air was rich with the scent of wet linen and early summer grass. And in that moment, between the soaking and the hanging, the world felt still and good. The quiet world of 17th century laundry was shaped not only by hands and habit, but by the humble tools that lived in every washtub corner and behind every cottage door. These were not the gleaming machines of modern times, but time-worn companions made of wood, iron, and cloth, each holding a story, each shaped by use and weather and generations of wash days past. With it, garments were stirred and beaten in the water, not in aggression, but in rhythm. Some wealthier homes had access to ridged metal boards framed in wood, over which fabrics were scrubbed with soap and knuckles. But in the countryside, cloth was scrubbed by hand, twisted, rubbed, and beaten with stones if necessary. Rinsed again and again until the water ran clear. A pair of hands would twist the garment with firm pressure, winding it tightly, until water poured out in slow, steady streams, splashing onto the packed dirt beneath. It slapped softly against fabric, breaking loose the soil of the week, a whispering percussion that matched the flow of day. After a garment had been soaped and scrubbed, it was lifted, heavy and dripping, into the rinse. The washwoman stood with her hands on her hips, her arms tired, her apron damp, and her heart strangely satisfied. The tools were simple, but the work was sacred. There, the washer would squeeze and shake the cloth, rinsing away not only dirt and suds, but the weight of the week. Strung between trees or from the shed to the fence post, the line was often hemp rope or braided flax, strong and coarse. They bore the marks of wear, water stains, splintered edges, the faint trace of a grandmother's initials carved into the handle of a wash paddle. They were never praised, rarely noticed beyond the yard, but they stood at the center of family life, ensuring that garments were not only cleaned, but cared for, not only washed, but renewed. Wooden pins, carved with care, or simply notched sticks, held the garments in place. The clothesline became a ribbon of domestic triumph. Clean shirts, folded pillowcases, sunlit aprons fluttering like prayers in the breeze. It was laborious work, requiring strength and repetition. But in its quiet rhythm lay a meditative sword of peace, a surrender to the water, the cloth, the task. Take, for example, the wash tub itself. It was more than a vessel. There were no white bars with fragrant names or pastel colors. Soap came in thick, brownish lumps, homemade from animal fat and lye. Its scent strong and clean, its texture uneven and crude. Those who could afford imported soap, made with olive oil or scented with rosemary or lavender, kept it locked in a small wooden box. Used sparingly for the finest linens or for laundering a child's christening gown. Made of stout timber, often pine, fir, or oak, and bound tightly with iron hoops. It was large enough to cradle entire bed sheets and deep enough to soak every heavy woolen skirt or linen chemise. When empty, it stood silently in the corner of the scullery or leaned against the shed wall. But on wash day, it was called to life, filled slowly and patiently with water, often heated by coals or by adding buckets of steaming liquid drawn from the cauldron. Beside the wash tub, the paddle waited. Long-handled and flat at its end, it was carved by hand, often passed from one woman to the next like an heirloom. Then there was the soap, or what passed for it in most rural households. But for most, the lye soap did the work. Strong, caustic, and biting on bare skin, it was softened slightly by soaking it in water overnight, then grated or shaved into the wash. It foamed gently when agitated and left a smell that clung to hands and cloth alike. Sharp, earthy, and oddly comforting. Another staple was the washboard, though it was not yet as common as one might think. Rinse tubs were separate from the wash tub, large barrels or second basins filled with cool water from the well. And then came the wringer. Not the iron crank machines of later centuries, but simple wooden rollers or just hands and elbows. The final tool, perhaps the most overlooked, was the clothesline. These tools, modest and honest, shaped the days of those who used them. And so, as the afternoon light filtered through the orchard and the sun played softly against linen folds swaying on the line, the washwoman stood with her hands on her hips, her arms tired, her apron damp, and her heart strangely satisfied. The tools were simple, but the work was sacred. Let us return now to the quiet rhythm of the 17th century laundry day, a day marked by patience, water, and a kind of humble reverence. It was never rushed. Laundry in those times was not a chore to be checked off, but a ritual to be endured, embraced, and honored. A hired laundress or a young daughter learning her way would begin with the oldest tradition, the soak. Between the folds, soap shavings were scattered, and over them, warm water was poured from iron kettles. Steam rose like fog from the fields at dawn, and the scent of ash soap, sharp, sour, and earthy, filled the air. Not violently, but with force, rhythm, and care. Ash paste made from lye and water, rubbed in with a thumb. A second round of soaking. A day laid out in the sun, where time and warmth might do what scrubbing could not. The fabric was scrubbed against itself, or against a ribbed stone, or a smooth wooden board. When the clothes were worn again, their fibers still held the memory of that soaking. A softness at the collar, a whiff of rosemary, a crease left by a careful hand. As each garment was conquered, wrung, and laid aside, there came a feeling not unlike prayer, the satisfaction of doing something old, something needed, something passed down across time. But in the small, steaming tub, the work of renewal had begun, slowly, gently, one garment at a time. Fingernails dug gently into seams. Wrists moved with practiced grace. The sounds were soft and steady, water sloshing, hand sliding, fabric sighing beneath effort. It was not a scent of perfume, but of work, of homespun labor, of something being made clean again. Clothes were not scrubbed dry. They were softened first, as if coaxing the stains and soil to loosen their grip. This was the prelude, the slow awakening of cloth from its week of wear. A breeze played with the corner of a damp apron hung by the fire. It was a world of quiet, of touch, of patience. The modern world with its machines, timers, and detergents would come centuries later. But in this moment, in the hush of midday, the washer and her basin were the entire world. One garment at a time, soaked and swollen with water, was lifted out and laid across a board or held over the edge of the tub. Sleeves were unrolled, collars were opened. Stains were eyed with familiarity. The ash from the hearth, the wine from last Sunday's table, the grass from a boy's knees. And at the very heart of it lay the gentle, steady practice of soaking and scrubbing. As the pale morning light slipped through the cottage window, the washwoman, whether she be the mother of the home garments, chemises, shirts, hose, shifts, linens from the bed, were laid in layers within the great wooden tub. Some women added special ingredients to the soak, a trick passed from mother to daughter. A splash of vinegar to kill lice, a handful of rosemary or thyme to sweeten the fabric, money allowed, a bit of orris root or lavender oil, saved in tiny corked bottles, was used to fragrance the linens for a sickbed or the christening gown tucked away in the hope chest. And then came the scrub. The washer leaned in, her hands red and damp, and rubbed. And if a stain refused to budge, there were old tricks. All the while, the washer would hum or remain silent. It was hard work, but not without moments of peace. And around her, life moved slowly. A pot boiled on the hearth. A chicken pecked at crumbs in the doorway. So, too, did the fabric remember. And as the day lengthened and shadows stretched across the cottage floor, there remained still more to do. But in the small, steaming tub, the work of renewal had begun, slowly, gently, one garment at a time. As the washing continued and garments passed from soak to scrub, there came next a moment of strength, quiet effort, and practiced hands. The wringing. Now, this task might seem simple to us today. in an age of machines that spin clothes dry in moments. But in the 17th century, wringing was a labor all its own, a test of patience, posture. The garment was folded once, twice, then twisted in opposite directions. Slowly, deliberately, the water was squeezed out, droplets falling to the stone floor below in soft, repetitive splashes. Bare toes might shift slightly to avoid the chill, or a cloth was laid down to catch the spill. But now, lighter, freed of their burden, they could be taken to the next stage. The drying in grand homes. This was done in long drying rooms with slatted windows. The heat of the fire had eased into the bones of the house, and all around her, the gentle silence of a home that had offered up its garments and was now on the path to clean. But in the countryside, or among the poorer folk, the wrung garments were laid carefully on hedges, fences, or lines of rope strung between trees or across the hearth. The cottage smelled richly now of soap, wet fabric, and the faint sweetness of the herbs they had added earlier. The washer might pause for a moment, wiping her forehead with the corner of her sleeve, and look at the heap of wrung linen beside her. It was not just laundry. It was memory, labor, and care, handled one twist at a time. Rosemary, sage, or even crushed bay leaves, scents that mingled with the damp air and made the room feel sacred in its own quiet way. It was a rhythm. Twist, hold, twist again until the weight was halved and the fabric relaxed, no longer heavy with water. And method, where water was coaxed from cloth, not by speed, but by rhythm and care. Picture a woman standing beside her wooden tub. The sleeves of her bodice damp and clinging to her forearms, her hair drawn back under a linen coif. Her hands were red from the warm lye and the cool rinse, but she paid them no mind. In her hands, she lifted a heavy shift, soaked through with steaming wash water. It was almost ceremonial, two women turning a spiral of linen between them, wringing out more than just water, wringing out weariness, wringing out stains and effort and time. Its weight was surprising, a burden of cloth and wetness that sagged and dripped with every movement. Wringing was done by hand. No crank or press for the common household. Only the strength of forearms and the technique passed down over years. And if another pair of hands was nearby, a daughter, a neighbor, a sister, they would each take an end, facing one another, and twist the garment in a slow, synchronized dance. The water that fell to the floor collected in shallow puddles, warming the flagstones beneath their feet. Once wrung, the clothes were not yet ready for wear. They were tired, damp things still. And so, by the end of the wringing, there was a sense of something being let go, of weight lifted, of stains surrendered, of garments that had gone through something and come out quieter on the other side. The afternoon light might now be slanting golden through the small window. The heat of the fire had eased into the bones of the house. And all around her, the gentle silence of a home that had offered up its garments and was now on the path to clean. As the last twist of cloth was wrung out and set aside, the laundry day eased gently into its next, slower rhythm. The drying, the rope, might sag a little under the weight, but it held firm, seasoned by weather and time. Shifts in chemises swayed alongside aprons and bonnets like pale flags of domestic life. Even socks and kerchiefs had their place, clipped to the line or draped across the fence rail. The smell here was different. More of hearth and wood smoke, mingled with the steam of damp cloth rising toward the beams. It reminded those in the household that the work was nearly done. The stains had been faced. The labor had been given. And now the garments would rest, just as the washer would soon rest after her day of care. In some homes, strings were drawn across the kitchen ceiling, and freshly wrung garments were pinned above the family's heads as they went about their day. The world felt somehow simpler, a place where daily burdens were lifted one piece of cloth at a time. Children might reach up playfully, tapping a dangling sleeve, while the washer gently shooed them off with a smile. Some garments were pegged with handmade wooden pins, whittled down from branches, their grips gentle but sure. Sometimes rosemary bushes lined the garden's edge, their oils released with the breeze, or lavender, planted not just for beauty, but for its moth-repelling scent. These smells clung to the drying garments, lingering in sleeves and hems, ready to comfort their wearers when dressed again. Others were simply draped, hung by corners or sleeves, the fabric stretching slowly as gravity pulled the dampness downward. This part of the process, though less vigorous than the scrubbing or boiling, is no less important, and in many ways it held a quiet poetry of its own. It was a time of patience and stillness, of watching fabric breathe again in open air, sunlight, or the warmth of the hearth. In the countryside, where space was kind and sky was wide, laundry was often dried outdoors. The washerwoman would gather the heavy, damp garments into a woven basket, the handles soft from years of use. The basket itself might be lined with a scrap of cloth, perhaps an old apron, to prevent the clean items from picking up new dirt. Then, stepping carefully outside, she would make her way to the drying green, a patch of grass, perhaps behind the cottage or near the orchard, where the air moved freely and the sun found its place. There, a simple rope was strung between two wooden poles or tied to the branches of fruit trees whose arms were already reaching skyward. As the linens hung, they fluttered faintly in the breeze. Not sharply, not hurriedly, but like the pages of an old book turning in their own time. The scent of laundry drying in the open air was soft and earthy, a mingling of soap, sun-warmed fabric, and the faint perfume of the plants nearby. In less fortunate households or on rainy days, drying happened indoors, by the fire over the back of a wooden chair, or on a rack suspended near the rafters. There was something soothing in the sight of drying laundry, a promise of cleanliness returned, of order slowly restored. And in this slow, sunlit moment, with clothes swaying in rhythm with the wind and the cottage quiet in the stillness, the world felt somehow simpler, a place where daily burdens were lifted, one piece of cloth at a time. As the sun dipped lower in the sky and the breeze softened into a hush, the time came to gather the laundry from its quiet vigil on the line. The shirts and shifts had a new crispness, a purity of form. Their fibers, scrubbed and rinsed and aired, now held the memory of wind and warmth. As she worked, her fingers moved with memory, not thought. This task so often repeated that it required no words, only presence. It was a way to bless the cloth once more, to press into it the final care of hands, the smoothing of creases, the soft touch of palms across seams and hems. The home was quieter now. Clean garments rested where there had been dirt. There was peace in this small triumph, the kind of peace found not in grand victories, but in humble completions. A shirt folded, a stocking paired, a baby's blanket, still smelling faintly of sunlight, laid gently on a shelf. In a time before wardrobes were common and closets were few, folded linens were stacked with great intention. Some were bound with ribbons or twine, others placed in drawers of carved wooden chests, where dried lavender buds or bay leaves might be scattered to guard against insects. The crackle of the hearth was the only sound, its flames now low and thoughtful, casting a gentle amber light across the stone floor. Shadows danced against the walls, and the scent of the drying fabric lingered in the warm air. Inside, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath bare feet and the low rustle of linen being put away marked the close of laundry day. The washerwoman, mother, daughter, sister, or servant, would rest now, her hands finally still. The scent of soap and sun lingering faintly in her skin. She would unpin them one by one, folding them neatly into her basket, careful not to let them touch the damp earth. There was ritual, and there was a kind of beauty that needed no witness. The scent that rose from them was a soft perfume, faint traces of lye soap mingled with the earthiness of grass, the sharp green of rosemary, and the clean breath of open air. Even the children, should they pass by, would lift a sheet to their faces and breathe it in. That's strange. Sweet scent of something both ordinary and sacred. Clean laundry. Each garment, once soaked and burdened with soap and soil, now danced lightly, whispering against its neighbors. dried by the gentle patience of the day. No more scrubbing, no more hauling water, no more smoke rising from the boiling pot. Now she would sit, perhaps on the wooden bench near the hearth, perhaps on the floor itself with the basket beside her, and she would begin to fold. The washerwoman would step outside again, this time not in haste or toil, but with a quieter rhythm, the kind that came with nearing the end of a long domestic ritual. The linens were warm to the touch, sun-kissed, almost crinkly, yet not stiff. Back inside the home, the washer's arms full and her back tired but satisfied, a different kind of quiet descended. Each piece had its own rhythm. The long folds of a shift, the square tuck of a napkin, the careful wrap of a stocking. Folding was more than just a chore, and as the piles grew, neat and tidy, the sense of accomplishment settled into the bones. Outside, the night deepened and stars blinked awake. In this small, overlooked rhythm of old life, wash, dry, fold, rest, there was comfort. There was ritual. And there was a kind of beauty that needed no witness. As the stars continued their silent vigil overhead and the candles in the cottage flickered with tired light, there remained one last gentle step in the long cycle of laundry, the care of storage. These chests, often carved with intricate floral patterns or religious symbols, bore the scent of polished oak and generations of hands that had opened and closed their lids. Inside, clean linens were stacked with loving order, flat sheets at the bottom, shifts folded just so, kerchiefs rolled into tight little bundles, and stockings nestled side by side like sleeping kittens. For in the 17th century, clean linens were not simply tossed into a bin or tucked away casually. Her keys would jingle softly at her side, a ring of iron or brass that granted her access to the linen cupboards, pantries, and locked doors. The linen inventory was taken seriously. It was her duty to track how many napkins had been used at a banquet, but they happened every week in thousands of cottages and manors alike. And in those slow, quiet hours, something tender endured. The simple care of cloth, the folding of hands, the deep breath that rose from the scent of lavender and sun-dried linen. How many sheets had been changed in the guest rooms, and when the undergarments of the master and mistress were due for another wash? Each entry, sometimes recorded in careful ink in a small ledger, told a story of domestic rhythm and control. They were precious hand-stitched possessions that held value and history, and their resting places were treated with quiet reverence. Folding the sleeves of her husband's shirt inwards with care, and murmuring a prayer beneath her breath. Not a grand prayer, but a domestic one offered to the slow work of life, that they might wear these garments in health, that they might last the season, that no moth would find them, and patience, and the silent love of those who labored for others, then tucked their work away like a secret. In many homes, especially those belonging to merchant families or the gentry, a piece of furniture known as a linen press or lay chest stood proudly against the wall, broad, wooden, and heavy with age. The poorer homes might not afford such fine furniture, but even there, the practice of careful storage was deeply respected. A modest wooden trunk or a shelf lined with rough-spun cloth might serve as the resting place for the family's precious garments. It was not uncommon for a family to own only a handful of good shifts or shirts, and they were guarded like small treasures, mended carefully, passed between siblings, or saved for feast days and church Sundays. And within these drawers and chests, an ancient custom lingered: the use of herbs and flowers to scent and protect the fabrics. Little muslin sachets or folded packets of linen would be tucked between layers, filled with dried lavender, cloves, rosemary, or bay leaves. These not only brought a fresh, comforting aroma to the garments, but also served to ward off moths and insects. In the deeper folds of night, a drawer opened in the silence would release a soft cloud of lavender and lye, the mingled perfume of cleanliness and care. In grander households, the responsibility for these linens might belong to a housekeeper or a senior maid. Meanwhile, in quieter homes, The mother of the household might crouch by the fire. After all, we're asleep. Smoothing down the edges of her children's shifts with her palms. Such soft acts were never written into history books. It was not just laundry that was stored in those old wooden chests. It was peace and patience and the silent love of those who labored for others, then tucked their work away like a secret. As the sky settled into a hush and the hearth fire dimmed to a warm, pulsing glow, a different kind of laundry work began. Not with water and lye, not with tubs and scrubbing boards, but with silence, still hands, and slow, patient stitching. In the 17th century, garments were not seen as disposable. Woolen stockings, worn thin at the heel, were carefully rebuilt by weaving new thread across the hole in a crosshatch pattern, like building a bridge one strand at a time. Shirts torn at the cuff were restitched with tight, tiny backstitches, sometimes so neat they could hardly be seen, and precision, able to restore lace, rehem a gown, or reinforce pleats with elegant precision. But in most homes, it was the women of the house, mothers, sisters, grandmothers, who performed this labor. Their movements were often automatic, done with a kind of rhythm that comes only from years of repetition. There was no applause, no celebration, only the soft sigh of fabric and the knowledge that something once torn was whole again. In the flicker of firelight, they worked in quiet companionship, sometimes humming an old tune, sometimes speaking softly, or often saying nothing at all. And sometimes, where cloth was beyond saving, a patch was lovingly sewn on, perhaps cut from an older, softer garment and chosen to match as closely as possible. The act of mending was more than just sewing. It was a gentle restoration of order, a way to reclaim something that was fraying. It was peaceful work, and in many ways, meditative. It required attention, but not urgency. It allowed the mind to wander gently while the hands remained busy, perhaps thinking of those who would wear the garments, or remembering a time when they were first made. But even when it didn't match, it was still done with pride. A nightshirt whose cuffs had been widened as the boy grew taller. An apron with a floral patch stitched on by a grandmother long gone, her stitches looser, but still holding strong. But in the quiet durability of love, expressed through every stitch. A single shift, a woolen hose, or a fine linen apron could live many lives across many years. Passed from mother to daughter, worn by brothers, turned inside out, patched, and even refashioned altogether. A patch on the elbow of a child's smock meant that someone noticed their tumble. A carefully mended tear on a husband's shirt collar meant that someone still held it, felt its wear, and chose not to throw it away. But with scraps of fabric, neat little coils of homespun thread, and a thimble that had passed through generations, the sounds of the day had faded. Perhaps a child slept nearby, curled on a blanket, their breathing soft and steady. The only noise now was the whisper of a needle through cloth, and the faint creak of a stool shifting beneath tired knees. This was an age of mending, not replacing, a time when a torn seam was not a tragedy, but an invitation to sit a while and repair. After the day's washing was folded and stored, women often sat near the hearth with a small wooden basket beside them, filled not with riches. Darning was one of the most common acts of mending. These patches were not signs of shame. They were badges of endurance, of care, of the kind of slow, unseen love that often keeps a household together. In wealthier households, skilled seamstresses might be hired for more elaborate repairs. Women whose fingers moved with grace, and in those moments, time seemed to slow. Some garments bore entire histories in their thread. A sleeve patched 3 times, once for a brother, once for a cousin, and once again for a child. As the night deepened and the embers gave off a last sleepy warmth, the mender might fold the garment slowly, set it aside, and run her hand across the repaired spot with quiet satisfaction. And in that calm, steady world of cloth and care, the people of the 17th century found their own kind of comfort, not in riches or luxury, but in the quiet durability of love expressed through every stitch. Close your eyes and imagine a year unfolding slowly in a quiet 17th century village, often referred to in some regions as the spring wash or big wash. This event was no ordinary day's work. Fires could be kept lit longer with less worry about smoke crowding the small interiors, and the breezes, still tinged with chill, carried a crispness that helped sheets dry cleaner, whiter, and with the smell of spring woven into every fiber. The heat bore down. And yet, still, the laundry was done, always with the patience of habit and the dignity of care. Clothes were hung on hedgerows, stone walls, and long ropes stretched between apple trees where the birds chirped overhead and the fabric fluttered like flags of home. In this season, laundry took on a more cautious rhythm. The big summer washings grew smaller. Clothes could not be hung out for long, lest they stiffen with frost. And yet, even then, laundry did not stop. It merely adapted. Smaller items were washed indoors with precious hot water heated over the hearth. Garments were dried by hanging them on wooden racks near the fire or by laying them flat on thick straw beds. There's no need to rush through time. The past is gentle here. Women became clever at layering duties, washing in the morning, drying by afternoon, mending in the evening. The drying lines grew heavier with thicker garments, woolen cloaks, padded doublets, and children's cold weather layers. More time was spent airing clothes near the hearth rather than outside. And fire-dried cloth carried the scent of wood smoke rather than wind. Herbs were no longer picked fresh, but bundled and dried, stored in jars for future wash days. It was a multi-day ritual, long anticipated, and sometimes shared among several neighboring households. Everything, from heavy bed linens and woolen winter clothes to the long-forgotten garments stored in chests, was pulled out, aired, and laundered. The slow, quiet, the hush of snow outside, the gentle crackle of firewood. It was a world in which time moved slowly, where even the act of wringing out a linen cloth could become meditative, even sacred. It was guided by the sky, shaped by temperature, and cradled by nature's moods, but with patience, with awareness, and with a quiet surrender to the world around them. They knew that the sky might change, the river might freeze, the wind might tear a drying line, but still, the clothes must be washed, and they always were in their own time. The wind was a dryer, the sun was a bleach. The snow sometimes even helped clean, with people spreading sheets on the snow to absorb its brightness and purity. The seasons pass not with rush or noise, but with the soft rhythm of change. The turn of soil in spring, the buzz of summer fields, the amber hush of autumn, and the white stillness of winter. For the people of that time, especially those charged with laundry, the weather was not a backdrop. It was a guide, a partner, and sometimes a gentle challenge. In spring, when the earth softened and buds burst open, it was a time of renewal, and so too began one of the year's biggest laundry undertakings. The Great Wash. Water was still cool, but easier to gather than an icy winter. In summer, the laundry work was more regular and easier in some ways, but also more tiring. The sun became an ally, its heat speeding up drying times, warming wash water, and bleaching whites with its natural light. Soap could dry quickly into cakes. Scented herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme, could be gathered fresh and tied into sachets that were tucked between folds of clothing. Women might walk to the riverbank with baskets on their hips, humming softly, sleeves rolled up, skirts hitched to the knee. They'd find their spot, dip the linens in slowly, and let the flow carry away the soil of daily life. And when the work was done, garments were spread on the grass to dry in the sun, a practice called grassing, where sunlight and chlorophyll together freshened and purified the cloth. But summer had its burdens too. Water could be scarce in drought. Bugs buzzed around the linens. Then came autumn, quiet and amber-toned, when the winds turned cooler and the sun began its early descent. Winter was perhaps the most challenging season for laundry. Rivers might freeze, and the cold made handling water painful. Water buckets froze overnight. There was a softness to winter laundry, despite its hardship. In every season, the task of washing clothes was woven into the daily and yearly rhythm of life. And so, through every turn of the year, the people of the 17th century washed not just with water and soap. Now, as you settle into stillness, picture that slow turn of the seasons. The firelit washing tubs, the wind-kissed linens, the snow-frosted sheets. There's no need to rush through time. The past is gentle here. Now that the linens have been scrubbed and wrung-dried in the wind or by the fireside and carefully folded with warm, practiced hands, we find ourselves at a quiet moment in the laundry cycle, one that often goes overlooked. It is the final, fragrant stage, the storing of freshly laundered garments and the gentle rituals of scenting and safeguarding them until their next use. Imagine, if you will, a modest wooden chest, polished by years of touch, its corners darkened with age and wear. It rests at the foot of a narrow bed, or perhaps against the wall of a stone cottage. No, this part was almost ceremonial. Clean garments were often aired once more, a final airing to ensure all dampness had gone. It was a form of care, a way of protecting fabrics not just from pests, but from the musty smell of long winters and damp cottages. In larger homes, linen presses, wooden cupboards with wide drawers, were used to keep the household's most valuable linens: tablecloths, bed sheets, and finely stitched garments. With it, the laundry work was complete. At least for now, in simpler homes, wooden chests, baskets, or high shelves sufficed. Wherever they were kept, items were stacked not too tightly to allow the air to move gently among them. In a time before closets and climate control, Poo used nature's gifts to preserve freshness and, perhaps, to bring a little beauty into the daily routine. Then, one by one, pieces were folded carefully and layered, each according to its kind. Linens with linens, shifts with shifts, stockings rolled together, perhaps tied with twine or bound with soft, worn ribbon. The fire on the hearth has burned low, glowing with soft embers, casting dancing orange shadows across the worn wooden floorboards. Her task to mend the garments that have served the household through wind and wear. A linen shift with a torn hem, a stocking with a soft hole at the heel, or perhaps a tunic with a fraying cuff. Each piece was an investment, not only of coin, but of time. Inside were scraps of old fabric saved from garments too far gone to wear, now given second life as patches. There were skeins of coarse thread, some made of linen, some wool. A few needles, polished by years of use, and perhaps a small pair of shears, dulled only slightly with time. Children were taught to sew by watching, and slowly, by doing. A cloak might carry 5 different patches, each a different fabric, each from a different season. A shift might be passed down and resized for a younger sister, its seams taken in, its hem raised, its cuffs refreshed with new lace. Every repair, every stitch was a mark of resilience, a sign that the cloth, like the family, endured. Elder women passed down techniques: how to turn a collar, how to hide a seam, how to make a strong thread last just a bit longer. Linen had to be spun and woven, wool sheared and dyed, seams carefully stitched by hand. The thread, the needle, the quiet evening hum, all part of a world now gone, but never forgotten. So when a tear appeared, or a thread wore thin, the answer was not to discard, but to restore. It reminded one to care, to tend gently, and to make do, not with hardship, but with grace. A single candle flickers gently atop the small table, its wax pooling slowly down its sides. The scent of tallow or beeswax lingers faintly in the air. It was an ending, but also a beginning, a promise that warmth and cleanliness had been restored, that garments were ready to serve again. A rip in a sleeve might be patched with a bit of fabric from an old shirt, the edges turned under and sewn down with tiny, patient stitches. A button, perhaps carved from bone or wood, might be sewn back into place with quiet focus, ensuring the garment could once again be fastened tight against the cold. that the rhythms of domestic life had, once more, turned their circle. A hush fell over the room as the needle moved in and out of the fabric, each stitch a small promise of preservation. Sometimes humming might fill the air, a simple lullaby, or the hum of the house settling into sleep. Other times, it was silent, save for the occasional crackle from the hearth. This chest, though humble in appearance, is a precious thing. It holds not only garments, but protection against the elements, warmth for winter, soft linens for sleep, and the comforting assurance of daily order. Before clothes were placed inside, they were never simply tossed in. Let us now settle into one of the softest corners of domestic life, a quiet, slow ritual that was as much about care as it was about economy: the mending of clothes. Imagine slipping into a linen sheet that smells of summer fields, or pressing your face into a sleeve that recalls rose gardens now long past. You too know the comfort of fabric fresh from its place of rest. You too feel the stillness that comes from daily labors brought to completion. It was a quiet luxury, one that required no coin, only care. And between these layers, there was something else, something that made the entire act of storage a pleasure to the senses: fragrance. The people of the 17th century. Though far removed from modern perfumes and artificial sprays, knew intimately the power of scent. They gathered herbs not just for food or healing, but for their calming, cleansing presence. Bundles of lavender, with its pale purple blossoms and calming aroma, were among the most prized. Stalks were harvested in late summer, dried in bunches, and later tucked between linens to keep them smelling fresh and to deter moths. Rosemary was another favorite, crisp and clean, with a pine-like strength that hinted at forest air. Sweet woodruff, when dried, carried a scent like freshly mown hay, soft and soothing. Sometimes dried petals of roses, especially from cottage gardens, were crumbled gently into sachets, sewn from leftover scraps of fabric, then tucked in drawers or laid between the folds of white sheets. Scent in those days was not just for pleasure, it had purpose. The storage places themselves were chosen with care. And then there was the closing of the chest lid, a soft, slow creak of wood, followed by the muffled click of the latch. But in that small act of closing the chest, there was something deeply symbolic. Sometimes, when clothes were finally worn again after weeks or months of rest, they carried with them those stored scents. Lavender clinging to a woolen cloak, rosemary whispering from the folds of a shift. Tonight, as your own sheets wrap around you, soft, familiar, warm, you are not so far from those who came before. So breathe in deeply now, and imagine the scent of lavender and old wood, the hush of an evening breeze slipping through a small window, and the soft weight of a woolen cloak folded away with care. Imagine the scene. It is evening, and outside, the world has gone dim. And here, seated by the fire, shawl draped over shoulders, needle in hand, sits the woman of the house, or perhaps an elder daughter, or a patient grandmother, her fingers moving with slow precision. In the 17th century, clothes were never casually thrown away. The mending basket was a quiet companion in every home. It might be nothing more than a small wooden crate or a straw-woven bowl lined with cloth. Repairs were made with love and practicality. A sock might be darned with a wooden egg tucked inside to give it shape. Stitches woven back and forth like a tiny net. It was slow work, yes, but it had a rhythm. And it was not always done alone. In some homes, especially when the work was great or the family large, mending became a shared affair. Over time, garments took on a story of their own. This quiet labor, done by firelight and finished with a sigh, was part of the slow turning of domestic life. Tonight, as you lie beneath your own covers, perhaps machine stitch, perhaps neatly hemmed, imagine the hands that once repaired by feel alone, guided by flickering light, driven by duty, but softened by love. The thread, the needle, the quiet evening hum, all part of a world now gone, but never forgotten. Close your eyes gently now, and let the soft rhythm of time carry you to another age. The arrival of the wash marked a certain moment, not just in the calendar, but in the life of the household. A working man might have 2 shirts, one for labor and one for church. A woman might possess a shift or 2, a bodice, a single good gown, and an apron. These few garments were worn repeatedly, brushed off when soiled, and gently aired when needed. Clothes were soaked, pounded, scrubbed, and rinsed, sometimes by hand, sometimes with paddles or bats against stones. Elders sat nearby, darning holes while watching the linens dry. The entire village might hum with similar activity. It was a time of labor, yes, but also of renewal. Now, dear listener, let your body grow heavy and soft. The quiet world of the 17th century still moves gently around us. And tonight, we're re-stepping into a space filled with stillness, into the heart of the home, where the clean linens rested like dreams folded into time. There were no electric irons, of course, but the women of the house, and sometimes the men, took great pride in pressing folds neatly with warmed stones or glass rollers. Instead, there was a humble beauty in simplicity. Just a few garments, well cared for, laid to rest in order and scent. The keys hung from a belt at the housewife's waist, tucked among others. For the pantry, for the storeroom, for the wooden chest of silver spoons. She alone often knew how much linen the family owned. How many shirts, how many sheets, how many towels. Imagine it standing quietly in the corner of a stone-walled room, keeping the memory of sunshine and lavender sealed inside oak doors. The garments rest. The press creaks slightly as it settles, and the home exhales, satisfied. A father's shirt, perhaps worn every day in the fields, now washed and folded, waiting quietly for Sunday Mass. A child's apron, its stains lightened by lie and sun, now creased into softness. A mother's coif, snowy and delicate, nestled like a white bird in the shadows of the press. A freshly cleaned chemise would be laid out, stretched, and folded, then placed gently upon a shelf, resting like a story untold. The sun warmed the backs of those bent over their tubs, and with every rinse, garments came closer to their former softness, their quiet dignity restored. And breathe in the scent of a season's hard work. She'd check for mice or signs of damp, and maybe, just maybe, replace a sachet of herbs to keep the garments sleeping sweetly. Lavender was a favorite, not just for its delicate fragrance, but for its ability to repel moths. Rosemary, too, with its sharp green scent, and bay leaves, believed to bring good luck and keep away insects. A housewife might sprinkle crushed dried thyme between the folds of a pillowcase or wrap a bar of hard, handmade soap in cloth and tuck it beside the bed linens, leaving a whisper of cleanliness behind. The moment of the linen press. Then came the stretching and drying. Great wooden frames called tenters were set out, usually crafted from solid oak or walnut. The linen press stood tall and dignified in the bedchamber or a hallway, sometimes carved with family crests or floral patterns. Its doors, though simple, creaked with age and use. Inside, long, smooth shelves were laid one over the other, and between them mortar, care, and the quiet pride of a clean home. And linens were pinned with iron hooks called tenterhooks to keep them taut. They fluttered gently in the breeze like pale sails, soaking up the sunlight. Washing was saved for when it was truly necessary, when the buildup of body oils, smoke, or earth became too great to ignore. And so, when laundry was finally done, it became a grand event. Freshly laundered garments were folded with care and returned to shelves or hung behind curtains to await their wearers. There was a gentle pride in the freshness of it all. There was spring washing, when the ice finally retreated from the rivers and the sun returned gently to the land. And there was autumn washing, done before the cold set in, to cleanse garments one last time before they were tucked away for winter. The year is long, slow, and circular in the 17th century. Unlike today, where machines hum daily with freshly soiled clothes, Laundry in those distant years was not a weekly task. The air is brisk but dry. Children rub sleep from their eyes while the adults move purposefully. Now they were carried to the washing place, perhaps a wooden tub in the yard, or a sloping bank by the river. Water must be fetched from the well or stream. Wood must be chopped to feed the fire beneath the great copper kettle. Ashes, saved from the hearth all winter long, are gathered carefully for lye making. Soap, if they had it, is brought out from its cool storage spot. This is not a chore. This is a seasonal cleansing of both fabric and spirit. It was a seasonal ritual, deeply tied to the turning of the weather, the sun's warmth, and the blessings of dry, still air. In those days, the very idea of laundry carried a kind of solemn weight. People planned around it. Communities prepared for it. The people of the time did not own many clothes. Imagine it now. The household rising before dawn. The sky still painted in soft gray. Linens were brought out from storage. Shirts, chemises, aprons, and tablecloths that had been folded, stacked, and sometimes even stored between layers of dried lavender, rosemary, or time to keep moths and must at bay. The rhythm of the day followed the movement of the sun. Children helped in small ways, fetching water, turning garments, or simply staying out of the way. Evenings were filled with the comforting smells of clean fabric, sun-dried grass, and wood smoke. And as the season moved on, as spring buds opened or autumn leaves began to fall, so too did the laundry fade into memory once more. Its work completed until the world turned again. After the great labor of laundry, the boiling, the scrubbing, though drying on tenterhooks beneath the sun, came a moment of peace. The linen press was not just a piece of furniture. It was a silent guardian of fabric, a wooden chamber where freshness was preserved like precious spices. Garments were not folded in haste. Each item was smoothed by hand, the wrinkles coaxed away with fingers or a heavy wooden smoothing board. In many households, layers of herbs were tucked between the garments. These were not homes of great wardrobes. There were no bursting closets or endless drawers. Some linen presses had locks. Clean fabric was valuable, both in material and meaning, and so it was guarded. And on quiet afternoons, when the fire was low and the house rested, she might open the press slowly. Let her fingers run across the smooth stacks. As night falls in your own world, imagine the hush of that linen press. Imagine it standing quietly in the corner of a stone-walled room, keeping the memory of sunshine and lavender sealed inside oak doors. The garments rest, the press creaks slightly as it settles, and the home exhales, satisfied. Welcome back, dear listener. The copper cauldron, blackened at its belly from years of fire, sits ready. Beside it, a wooden bucket brims with wood ash, and nearby, a crock of thick animal fat waits, pale and lumpy. Let your eyelids soften, your breath steady. You've wandered far into the 17th century, where time flows slower than over the fire. The lye and the fat were combined in the great pot, and so began the stirring, long, methodical, unhurried. They shared stories, watched the pot bubble, watched the mixture change. Then, when it was ready, the soap was poured into wooden molds lined with cloth, where it cooled for a day or more. Afterward, it was cut into rough blocks with a long blade and stacked on shelves to cure. For weeks, sometimes months, in a dry, breezy loft. Some women wrapped their best bars in cloth and gave them as gifts, a sign of care and domestic pride. Some added salt to help the soap harden. A lucky few might toss in dried herbs or ground rose petals for scent or softness. The bars sat in quiet piles, waiting. A daughter might sneak a sniff of the lavender one before guests arrived. A child might be scolded for wasting even a corner of it on play. The cauldron has cooled. The pot has been scrubbed. The soap rests, hardening in the loft, bathed in afternoon light. The morning mist hangs low as the sun peeks timidly over the hills. A block of soap, handmade just days or weeks ago, rests on the stone like a relic. With calloused fingers, they rub it firmly against the cloth. Then dip the linen into the stream's embrace, scrubbing it in careful strokes. Birds call from willow branches, and the grass still holds the chill of night. The slap of wet fabric against stone. The gurgle of the stream. The hush of conversation and occasional giggles. Someone hums a song, its melody curling through the trees like a memory long kept. It is peaceful, this labor. It is shared, understood, passed from mother to daughter. Somewhere near the edge of a village, just beyond the fields and thatched rooftops, the washerwomen gather. Baskets on hips, sleeves rolled, laughter soft as water. Sometimes an older woman sits nearby, no longer able to scrub, but offering quiet advice. Her hands may be still, but her wisdom moves in every motion of the younger ones. One woman gently wrings out a monogrammed napkin, a wedding gift from a sister far away. Another unfolds a stained apron, the corner mended by hand. Others are left to soak in silence, the soap rising like clouds in the stream as time and water do their work. But with time, the harsh edges faded, leaving behind a bar that was crumbly, clean-smelling, and firm to the touch. Not glamorous, but essential. Not sweet, but clean. It held the memory of hands that made it and hands that used it, again and again. These blocks would last through seasons of washing, scrubbing linens in streams, soaking smocks in wooden tubs, or gently rubbing the soles of a shepherd's feet after a long day in muddy fields. They talk of children, neighbors, the weather, the upcoming market. Muscles ache, backs tighten. But there's pride in the work, a quiet dignity. Because to wash is not just to clean. It is to restore, to renew, to begin again. And always, always, they return to the cloth. Rinse, wring, beat gently on the stone, and lay it across a bush or branch to dry beneath the slow warming sun. But mostly, it was a simple brew, raw, strong, and honest. And even the soap that cleanses the cloth is born from warmth, patience, and the rhythm of quiet hands. The water flows steadily, as if it too knows the rhythm of washing. Flat stone slabs have been set at the shore, worn smooth by years of use. Smooth enough now to feel like polished bone beneath the touch. Tonight, we slip into the stillness of a rural kitchen. Not for supper, but for something else entirely. Look around. The hearth crackles softly. This, dear dreamer, is the quiet beginning of soap making. Not the perfumed bars we know today, but the humble, scratchy kind that was born out of necessity and care. The process began with lye, extracted by pouring hot water through sifted wood ash. This lye water, cloudy and caustic, would slowly drip into a bucket. And it was tested not by chemistry kits, but by instinct. A feather dipped in it should dissolve, they said. Too strong, and it would burn the hands. Too weak, and the soap would crumble. It was made in homes, by mothers and grandmothers, during times when the fire was already lit for winter heat and time allowed for steady stirring. Soap was not bought from shelves. It was boiled into existence, one slow batch at a time. The animal fat, usually rendered from pigs or cattle, had to be purified. It was gently melted and strained until it gleamed like ivory syrup. Stirring was not just physical, it was ritual. Women talked while they stirred. Hours passed. The cauldron frothed. The mixture thickened. The scent was sharp at first, almost sour. Soap was never wasted. Even the smallest leftover shavings were collected in little bags to be reused again. In many households, a special shelf or chest was dedicated just to soap. And so, soap born from fire and fat, ash and time, became one of the household's most precious creations. As your breath slows, imagine the warm scent of ash and lard, of old wood and quiet labor. Come closer now, gently, and watch them work by the river's edge. Their feet sink into the soft earth, damp and forgiving. The women bend with practiced ease, each movement unhurried, deliberate. There is a ritual here. not just in the act, but in the sound of it. The linens are not just garments. Some are swaddling cloths from infants now grown. Others are worn undergarments, plain but cherished. Each item holds a story. Some stains are scrubbed with urgency. Old berry juice, soot from the hearth, blood from a finger pricked while sewing. Between scrubbing, the women rest, stretching their backs and dipping their hands into the cold water. The air fills with the scent of soap and damp linen. Not unpleasant, just honest, pure, familiar. Sometimes a child joins the group, chasing ducks along the bank or splashing under a mother's watchful eye. And when the washing is done, baskets are filled again, this time with clean, wet laundry, heavy and fragrant. The washerwomen walk back slowly, skirts damp, shoulders sun-kissed, laughter fading into the trees. And now, dear listener, as your own breath becomes still like the water's surface, you too can imagine the cooling air, the sound of linen flapping gently in the breeze, the hush of the stream in its eternal flow. After the river's cool embrace and the rhythmic labor of the washerwomen, there came a moment of stillness, not of rest, but of waiting. The laundry, newly cleansed and dripping, was ready to meet the sun. Instead, in the 17th century, long cords of hemp or flax rope were stretched between trees, fence posts, or simple wooden T-pegs hammered into the earth. It was not uncommon to see nightshirts, chemises, aprons, baby bonnets, and bed linens, all displayed at once, each item telling a silent story as it danced in the breeze. Some mended socks under a tree, others shelled peas or plucked chickens in the shade. A scent of sun-dried soap, fresh air, and faint herbal notes filled the space. A scent you recognize in no other century but this one. And when the cloth was finally ready, it was gathered with reverence, never rushed, always folded with intention. And every now and then, someone would walk among the lines, checking for uneven drying or flipping a damp corner toward the breeze. Housewives or maids would smooth garments over wooden tables, creasing them carefully with hand pressure or warm stones wrapped in cloth, used like early irons. The sun, having helped dry the wash, now slipped behind the hills. Candles were lit, hearth fires rekindled, and those same garments, now clean and gently scented, would soon wrap bodies in sleep, be laid out for morning dressing, or serve in meals to come. Laundry was never just laundry. It was part of life's rhythm, woven into the day like sunlight through a cottage window. It was not merely a compromise with the weather, but a reshaping of rhythm, a way to listen to the seasons. The room is warm but dim, with smoke curling lazily toward the thatched roof. Above the hearth, suspended by wooden beams or iron rods, hang drying racks, simple wooden frames or ropes stretched across the ceiling like a web of domestic intention. These were the winter skies of laundry, where garments would rest not under the sun, but under the slow breath of the fire, and fold domestic tasks gently into the shifting cycle of the year. The warmth of the fire would rise to meet them, but not too fiercely. Too close, and the fabrics might scorch or stiffen. Cats would curl beneath the hearth, soaking up the warmth beneath the gently dripping linens. And through the quiet crackling of firewood, the soft patter of water falling from a sleeve or the rustle of fabric shifting on the rack could be heard. Subtle lullabies of life, work, and time. Drying became an act of balance, heat and distance, time and care, all dancing around the fire's rhythm. The fire glows low. The linens above you sway gently, casting soft shadows on timber walls. Outside, frost kisses the windows. But here, you are warm, wrapped in the rhythms of those who live gently with the seasons. By morning, the garments would be ready, soft, warm, and carrying with them the gentle scent of hearth and home. They would be gathered and folded by morning light, their softness a comfort against the season's cold. And then wrapped in cloth to dry smaller garments or to be tucked into folded linens. It was a quiet, mindful practice, one that made space for stillness, for patience, for slowing down, just as winter asks us to rest. The 17th century home honored this request by drawing its chores inward, softening its steps, and holding its warmth close. Some homes used heated pans or iron paddles passed beneath damp cloths to ease the drying. These weren't rushed methods. They were careful, quiet, and respectful of the fabric and the season. These weren't just for fragrance, but for keeping pests away and offering a gentle reminder of nature's hand in the work. Bedsheets, tablecloths, and nightshirts each had their place. Others used oak chests with hinges that creaked like old stories and lids worn smooth from generations of hands. In these spaces, servants moved silently beneath the lines, tending to the fire, turning linens gently, and rotating garments to ensure every corner met the warmth. When the warm embrace of summer faded and the days began to shorten, the gentle art of drying laundry moved from the meadows and garden lines to the cozy interiors of 17th century homes. No longer open to the wild scent of outdoor breezes, the rooms now held the fragrance of wood smoke damp, wool herbal soap, and the faint sweetness of dried lavender. If the family had been wise enough to store sachets in their linen chests from summer-esque garden, laundry drying indoors wasn't just a task. It became part of the home's very breath, its atmosphere gently altered by the cycle of cleanliness and fire. The breeze, once a helper, grew sharp with chill, and the golden sun that once kissed the linens grew shy behind clouds. But laundry could not wait for spring's return, and so families turned inward, bringing their washing with them. In wealthier homes, laundry chests were lined with embroidered sachets. In cottages, they might simply be kept in woven baskets covered in a linen cloth stitched years ago by a grandmother's hand. These were humble tools, but they served with quiet dignity. In wealthier homes, the airing might take place in enclosed drying gardens, hidden behind hedges, while in cottages and farms, laundry would flap openly beside vegetable patches or across stone walls warmed by the sun. And in the quiet hours that followed, the countryside would bloom, not just with flowers, but with lines of linen, fluttering softly in the breeze like pale sails set to catch the sky. The wind, too, helped. Not harsh or whipping, but a steady, whispering presence that rustled through leaves and fluffed the fabric as it dried. Clotheslines were not strung between metal poles or plastic clips as we know today. The freshly washed linens were hung with care. Heavy sheets were doubled over lines to distribute their weight, while smaller pieces were secured with carved wooden pegs or gently draped across hawthorn hedges. The sun played its part quietly, but powerfully. It bleached the fabric gently, lifting away lingering stains and restoring brightness with nothing more than golden light. While the laundry dried, women often remained nearby, not simply to guard their work, but to take this chance for quieter chores. As the afternoon wore on, a transformation began. The linens grew lighter, drier, warmer. Their textures softened. Back indoors, the next ritual began. Clean linens weren't simply stuffed into drawers. They were pressed, folded, and often perfumed. To keep the linens fresh, bundles of dried herbs were nestled among them, especially lavender, rosemary, or sweet woodruff, depending on what grew near. Some families had dedicated linen presses, tall wooden cabinets where household linens were stored according to type. And so, with everything folded and tucked away, the household moved toward evening. There was a peace in this cycle, a trust that the sun would rise, that the river would flow, that clean linen would wait quietly, ready to serve again. Now, as you lie beneath your own soft blankets, imagine a world where every thread was touched by nature, washed by hand, dried by sky, and folded with care. In cottages, manor houses, and farmsteads alike, indoor drying became its own quiet ritual. Imagine a modest, timber-framed cottage, its central hearth alive with flickering flame. Here, shirts, linens, and woolen stockings were draped in layers, turned now and then by careful hands. In wealthier homes, a dedicated drying room might exist, a chamber with high ceilings, broad hearths, and crisscrossed rafters specifically designed for laundering in winter. And then there were the warming stones. Flat river rocks, sometimes kept near the hearth, gently heated. The scent of the house changed too. Children might nestle beneath the drying lines, watching nightshirts sway like pale ghosts. Sometimes in the middle of winter, the drying laundry would stay overnight. In these colder months, drying laundry was not merely a necessity. Now, let your mind drift to that quiet cottage room. The fire glows low. The linens above you sway gently, casting soft shadows on timber walls. Outside, frost kisses the windows. But here, you are warm, wrapped in the rhythms of those who live gently with the seasons. In the countryside of 17th century Europe, beyond the meadows and cobbled villages, stood the sprawling estates of noble families. Their manors nestled among rolling hills and bordered by gardens, orchards, and sometimes winding brooks. And within these grand homes, tucked behind the main house or nestled beside the stables, existed a building of quiet industry and warm steam, the manorial wash house. Soap and steam, all choreographed beneath the high timber beams and open hearths of the estate's domestic heart. This was no modest cottage laundry corner. 'Twas a dedicated structure, often built of stone, where laundry became a grand and organized affair. A dance of servants, dozens of linen napkins. Bed coverings, servants' uniforms, children's tunics. Linen as white as snow, fluttering against blue skies, gave even the servants a moment of beauty to admire. Indoors, on colder days, garments might be hung from beams or laid upon wooden frames before the fire. The heat was controlled carefully. Too much, and the precious garments might shrink or burn. And the fine lace cuffs of the master and mistress must all be washed in carefully managed batches. Laundresses in great houses knew the linens of their masters intimately. They recognized the wear patterns in a child's tunic, the perfume in a mistress's nightgown, the sweat at the collar of a soldier's shirt, and the dust of life in a world where bathing was rare and the air was heavy with soot and season. A nobleman's coat might never be washed, brushed instead, and perfumed. A laundress works by herself, perhaps with only one helper, surrounded by water basins and bundles of damp linen. The air is still warm and scented faintly of ash soap. She holds a chemise that once hugged the skin of the lady of the house, worn, yes, but softened by use. It smells gently of lavender and of skin. She lowers it into a tub of warm, soapy water and presses it carefully with her hands. Women would gather by the stream, beating cloth lightly against smooth rocks. Others hung undergarments near kitchen fires, allowing the gentle smoke to dry them slowly and infuse them with a homely warmth. In the absence of perfumes or powders, this subtle scent became a mark of comfort, a sign of care. They shared company, laughter, and stories, all while rinsing out the weeks were laid atop lavender sachets or beside bundles of dried mint. They waited in silence for another cycle of closeness with the skin. But even here, underthings were handled gently and discreetly, tucked beneath heavier garments in the baskets or held close to the body. But his undershirt, simple white linen, would be changed and cleaned weekly, or even daily, depending on one's wealth and help. To wash these items was not just a task of cleanliness, but an intimate act of care. Yet even here, among structure and stone, the act of laundering retained its essence, a nurturing, cyclical rhythm, washing away the traces of days lived and preparing the body for comfort once more. The washing of undergarments was not glamorous, it was not praised, but it was honest, steady, intimate, a kind of humble devotion that connected the body to the cloth and the cloth to the hands that cleaned it. Soap was rubbed into stained patches, yellow under the arms, faint marks at the hem. Wooden paddles or washbats might be used gently, tapping the fabric rather than punishing it. Delicate lace was protected, rolled into muslin cloth before soaking. To handle laundry was to know a family in all its unseen moments, its sleep, its toil, its tenderness. And yet, they held that knowledge silently, like caretakers of invisible lives. In the 17th century, beneath every corseted gown, doublet, and petticoat, there rested a hidden world of cloth. Simple linens and small garments that rarely saw the light of day, yet were closest to the body and perhaps most important of all. A line of Lady S shifts flapping in the wind was not for show. They were hung behind hedges or inside warm attics, far from curious glances. A child's shift stained with spilled stew. A worn pair of woolen hose with mended knees. The sweat-ringed collar of a traveler returning from the road. Each item was a whisper from someone's inner world, from their body, their rhythms, their private selves. These were the undergarments, known by many names depending on region and style. Shifts, chemises, drawers, or simply small things. Each item has its own treatment. Rougher woolens beaten and scrubbed. Delicate lace handled with the gentlest touch, perhaps even cleaned with milk or starch solutions made in-house. Polished to a shine where stacks of cloth were stored with herbal sachets to keep moths and must at bay. Lavender, rosemary, and even crushed cedar leaves were commonly used, offering a fragrant hint of nature with every fresh garment retrieved. Imagine entering such a space in the early morning. The air is thick with mist, rising from copper pots of water heated over open flames. Windows are fogged with vapor, and the stone floor glistens with splashes from the day's work. A large hearth roars gently in the background, flames licking the base of wide basins and iron cauldrons. The scent is rich with soapwort and wood smoke, linen and lavender. The laundry here is not just a matter of necessity. It is a ceremonial effort, performed by trained hands. The washhouse staff included launderers, assistants, and sometimes even a dedicated laundress-in-chief, a woman of skill and status within the servant hierarchy. She would oversee the sorting, pre-soaking, boiling, rinsing, and drying. Lists were kept, tallies noted. Everything was accounted for, and still, there was quiet. No rush, no clamor. Just the rhythmic sounds of wringing cloth, the plop of linens into tubs, the gentle hiss of steam rising, and the occasional murmur of women working in comfortable routine. Outside on fine days, vast lines of drying sheets would stretch across manicured lawns. What many might forget is how deeply personal this task was. On some days after the linens were dried and folded, they were placed into great linen presses. Heavy wooden cupboards, these manorial washhouses were not open to all. Their scale and ritual belonged to the world of wealth and order. As the sun set over the estate and the last mist curled above the washtubs, laundresses would rest their hands, drying them by the fire, their work done until the next cycle began. Let this vision soothe your thoughts. The quiet industry of warm stones, folded linens, and noble washhouses breathing steam into the cold air. Their life was humble, their fabric plain, but they bore the daily work of the skin, absorbing sweat, oils. Because undergarments were in closest contact with the body, they required more frequent laundering than outer garments, which were rarely cleaned. Now picture a small laundry room. Not the grand washhouse of the manor, but a quieter corner. These undergarments, often of fine but sturdy linen, were scrubbed not with violence, but with patience. There was something deeply private about the process. Undergarments were rarely discussed. Their laundering was kept separate, their drying hidden from the eyes of visitors. And yet to the laundress or household maid, these garments told quiet stories. Among the peasantry, the process was simpler, but no less tender. Some women added herbal infusions to the rinse water. Marigold for brightness, chamomile for scent, or rosewater for softness. When the underthings were finally folded, crisp, pale, and soft to the touch, they were returned quietly to chests and drawers. So here, in this gentle part of history, we glimpse a world of quiet care, not grand or ceremonial, but deeply human. Let this slow rhythm carry you deeper into rest, wrapped in the softness of linen and the hush of quiet work. By the time the linens had been soaked, scrubbed, rinsed, and dried, whether in the sun-dappled meadow behind the cottage or beside the smoky hearth in a manor house, there was yet another step before they could return to their proper place. The transformation of soft, limp fabric into crisp, elegant cloth through the gentle arts of starching and pressing. A few linens lay flat and pale upon it, clean, but lacking the structure that society, fashion, and pride demanded. The starched ruff, the stiffened cuffs, the pleated apron. They all required more than mere washing. They required shape. They required form. Picture, if you will, a long wooden table, sun streaming through diamond-paned windows. And so, the starch was prepared. Made of fine linen, these gathered collars could contain dozens of tiny pleats, each one set and curled with patience. After starching, the ruff was draped carefully over a curved frame. A goffer or set iron would then be used to shape each fold. In noble houses, pressing was done in rooms of their own, where even the smoothing of napkins was a kind of ceremony. In simpler homes, a woman might kneel beside her table with her child asleep in the corner, shaping her only good apron into crisp lines as the stew simmered. This was not brute ironing, but sculpting. Ruffs stood tall at the throat. Aprons rustled lightly when walking. It was a quiet statement to the world. This cloth is loved. This cloth is ready. A well-pressed kerchief, folded just so, could speak volumes of care and dignity. In the 17th century, starch was often made from wheat flour or bran, boiled gently with water to form a smooth, milky paste. A ruff, now starched and curled, would be nestled in a separate box or draped over a rounded cushion to preserve its shape. Delicate lace was wrapped in clean linen cloth, protected from dust and moth. No, irons were heavy objects heated beside a hearth or in glowing coals. Storing these delicate belongings was an art form. Women would tuck small cloth sachets or bundles of herbs between the folds of linen. These were placed carefully among nightshirts, tablecloths, or undergarments, like little guardians of freshness, and finding it still faintly cool to the touch, with a scent like a distant meadow. Imagine your own pillow, gently pressed and scented by time. Imagine each breath filled with a lavender breeze, and each exhale as slow as a cupboard door swinging shut. A lavender-scented shift, a rose-petaled kerchief. The feeling was not unlike waking from a good dream, a sensory memory, both old and clean. In wealthier homes, sachets might even be embroidered or scented with imported ingredients, like dried orange peel or exotic musk, a symbol of refinement and far-off trade. Lavender, of course, was beloved, its floral sharpness both soothing and practical, warding off moths and leaving behind a whisper of summer. Rosemary added a woodsy sharpness. Cloves brought warmth. Rose petals offered softness, while orris root, ground from the iris flower, lent a subtle, powdery elegance. And so, in many homes, be they grand manors or modest cottages, there existed a space devoted to the keeping of such things. Sometimes it was a tall oaken press with iron hinges and carved doors. It sent a blend of age, beeswax, and polished wood. Other times, it was a humble chest, padded with folded cloths and sprigs of herbs, tucked near the hearth or the bed. Darkness settled among the folds of linen. The scent mingled with the wood, sinking into every thread. And for weeks, sometimes months, those garments would rest there, quietly absorbing that soft, herbal perfume. Hear the faint hiss of an iron lifted from coals. Smell the ghost of lavender rising with the warmth. The laundress would test their heat with a flick of water. If it sizzled too quickly, it was too hot. After the long, slow rituals of soaking, scrubbing, rinsing, drying, starching, and pressing, there came a final, quieter chapter in the laundry cycle. One less about labor and more about love. The garments, now clean and crisp, did not simply disappear into drawers. No, they were tucked away like treasures into spaces that whispered of care, calm, and gentle tradition. The linen closet. A linen cloth might be laid between the iron and the garment to protect it from scorching. She would press, not slide. The fabric would respond slowly, sighing into smoothness. The mixture was left to cool, and then, with fingers or a soft cloth. It was applied evenly to the desired fabric. Massaged gently into collars, ruffs, or coifs. This paste was then strained, sometimes multiple times, through muslin or fine sieves, until it reached a consistency both silky and cloud-like. The process was done with care. Too thick, and the linen would harden like bark. Too thin, and it would sag like a tired leaf. Some laundresses infused the starch with herbs or soft oils, just a trace. Lavender for gentleness, or bay leaf to repel moths. Let us pause to admire the delicate ruff, a symbol of fashion and dignity. To press fabric in the 17th century did not mean gliding a hot electric iron over it. There were other tools too: wooden rollers, pressing boards, flat stones, the finished linen. Crisp, cool, and smelling faintly of ash and wild herbs was a thing of quiet pride. And so, pressing and starching were more than chores. They were a form of gentle craftsmanship, a labor of hands, heat, and time. As you sink now deeper into the softness of your pillow, imagine those quiet hands, folding, shaping, smoothing. The day's labor is done. The ruff stands proud. The linen glows faintly in the lamplight. Let sleep take you now, steady like the press of warm iron on fabric, and gentle as a folded sheet waiting in a drawer. In the 17th century, linens were not abundant. Each sheet, each shift, each kerchief had worth, often stitched by hand and mended with devotion. Garments were folded with care, not haste. A linen nightshirt might be folded thrice, once at the shoulders, again at the middle, and once more at the hem. But perhaps the most enchanting part of this ritual was the addition of scent. In an age before artificial perfumes and mass-produced air fresheners, fragrance came from the earth, from gardens, fields, and forests. Sometimes these herbs were blended with ground spices and stitched into tiny pillows, no larger than the palm of one's hand. And then came the act of closing the cupboard door. It might creak softly, like a lullaby. Inside, the air grew still. When the time came to wear them again, there was a small moment of joy, unfolding a garment. So now, as you lie there, warm beneath your own blanket, imagine those wooden cupboards and the layers of fabric folded neatly within. Imagine your own pillow, gently pressed and scented by time. Imagine each breath filled with a lavender breeze, and each exhale as slow as a cupboard door swinging shut. Long before the hum of machines, before the warm hiss of indoor plumbing, laundry was not just a chore. It was a ritual of gathering. In small villages and scattered countryside communities of the 17th century, wash days unfolded like a familiar play, each act set beside flowing water, each scene full of life. And although laundry was hard work, it was also one of the few times women could come together, away from the watching eyes of men, children, and the endless duties of the hearth. In many towns, there was a public washhouse, known in France as a lavoir, or perhaps a shaded bend in a river where stones had been arranged long ago for kneeling, scrubbing, and rinsing. And as clothes dried, the women would rest, sipping weak ale or water, sharing a crust of bread or a bite of cheese, their laughter growing softer as the day wore on. There, in the early light of morning, women would arrive with bundled linens and wooden buckets, with cakes of soap wrapped in cloth, and hands ready to work. Sun-kissed, each woman carrying a basket of freshness back to her home and a heart perhaps lighter than when she came. A place where bonds were strengthened, where solitude was broken. It was therapy and tradition, community and ceremony, all folded together like fresh sheets. Imagine the easy chatter, the gentle splash of water on stone, and the hush of linen fluttering in the breeze. Let it wash over you, the rhythm, the warmth, the care, and let it guide you slowly toward the quiet stillness of sleep. These soaps had a strong smell and a coarse texture, but they did the work. Women would store them wrapped in cloth or linen, sometimes scented with lavender or rosemary if they had access. These were used for deep cleaning and whitening. The lye made from wood ash, mixed with water and left to steep. They held wet garments, soap cakes, kindling for the fire. They were carried on backs, hung on hooks, or rested beside the hearth, ready to serve. Over time, these baskets developed their own character. A creak here, a bent reed there, like an old friend showing its age. Imagine the flicker of firelight across the wooden paddle, the scent of lye and lavender still lingering faintly in the air. Picture the well-worn hands that wielded them, day after day, season after season. Whether it was a carved oak armoire in a merchant-est house or a simple wooden chest in a modest cottage, this space held one of the household's most precious possessions, its collection of clean, well-kept linens. Women knew how to handle it carefully, respecting its burn and its power, as they stirred cloth through the mix with long wooden paddles. These are the sounds of care, of people tending to the simple, endless need for clean. And in their quiet rituals, there is comfort. Once the hard labor of scrubbing and rinsing had ended, once the last drop of water had fallen from the heavy linen sheets and the drying lines had swayed in the afternoon sun, its hinges creaked softly and its scent told of decades of soaps, fires, and floral bundles. These chests might be locked to keep the most valuable linen safe. Tablecloths for feast days, fine shirts for weddings, christening cloths wrapped in careful bundles of cloth and string. Every piece, whether a napkin, a shirt, or a bedsheet, represented hours of labor, months of care, and years of wear. In large homes, the linen mistress or housekeeper oversaw the careful rotation and airing of linens. In small cottages, the task was more intimate. A woman alone at the end of the day, folding by candlelight, whispering to herself as she placed the last shirt gently on the stack. Washing was only part of the journey. After the laundering came the folding, a task approached with almost ceremonial care. And ceremonial pieces, with lace, trim, or embroidery, were folded separately, sometimes wrapped in muslin or old pages of paper. A well-kept cupboard meant readiness for guests, care for the ill, or peace in preparation for childbirth. It meant the household was tended to with diligence and love. A new and quieter ritual began, the folding and storing of clean laundry. A pair of hands, aged, perhaps, but gentle, lifts each item with care. The air smells faintly of lavender and starch. There is no rush, no noise, only the rustle of cloth and the hush of evening. The folds were smooth and consistent, often pressed beneath other linens to flatten. They folded not just linens, but memories, responsibilities, and love into those soft white bundles. Their world may have been harsher, their work harder, but in this peaceful moment, there was quiet joy. Some homes used wooden presses or placed smooth stones on top of the piles to keep the folds crisp. In some regions, people scrubbed with fuller's earth, a soft clay with remarkable cleaning powers. It could be patted into stains or stirred into water to make a muddy, magical cleansing brew. Before the invention of machines and detergents in neat plastic bottles, 17th century laundering was done with the aid of tools so simple and natural they almost whispered their purpose. Passed from mother to daughter, mended when broken, cherished not for beauty but for usefulness. In rural homes, sprigs of rosemary, lavender, or mint were laid between the folds. These herbs acted as natural insect repellents and infused the cupboard with a soft, clean scent. In cooler climates, cloves or cedar shavings might be tucked into sachets and placed in drawers, warding off moths and adding a warm, spicy note to the cloth. They told stories in their wear, nicks in the paddle, knots in the basket, stains that would never fully wash away. Filled with warm water, these tubs served as the center of laundry days, steaming gently in the morning sun. Smaller basins, also carved from wood or hammered from metal, would hold rinse water. Soap would float lazily in them, sometimes tethered to prevent its loss in the suds. Ironing was rare and usually reserved for special garments, done with solid irons that were heated in the fire and handled with thick cloths. The smell of scorched linen was familiar and sharp, but for most, wrinkles were accepted as a part of daily life. Each item was shaped by thoughtful hands and bore the gentle marks of years of use. These were not tools made for speed. They were made for endurance, patience, and repetition. The air would fill with the slap-slap of wet linen against stone, the rhythmic scrubbing of cloth beneath rough hands, and the steady voices of conversation. Women, young and old, swapped stories and songs, shared village news, and sometimes secrets. These were short wooden paddles, broad and flat, with smooth edges worn down by use. Soap was rubbed into the fabric, then pressed and dragged against the ridges. The grain of the wood worked against the weave of the linen, coaxing the stains to lift. In wealthier homes, copper washboards appeared, but most folk made do with what they had: a flat board, a scrubby rock, or just their knuckles and resolve. Women would hold the handle firmly and beat the soaked garments laid across a stone or wooden platform. The rhythmic thunk of the bat against wet cloth was a familiar sound in the village air, echoing in slow, steady pulses. The motion was not rushed. It was methodical, almost meditative. With each strike, dirt loosened and the cloth surrendered its soil. It was a place where laughter could echo freely, where complaints were aired like soiled garments, and where wisdom passed down as gently as a clean sheet on the line. They knelt together on straw mats or wooden planks, hands plunged deep into chilly water, their skirts pinned up to avoid soaking, their fingers red from the cold. They used wooden paddles, beetles, or bats to beat the dirt from fabric, often with more force than finesse, their arms strong and sure. The water carried away the suds and the soil, and with it, perhaps, the weight of the week's burdens. Young girls would help their mothers, learning the names of herbs used in soap, practicing folding, or simply playing nearby, floating petals downstream, pretending the river was an ocean. There were moments of silence too, the hush of concentration, the deep focus of hands at work. And when the sun rose higher, warming the backs of necks and brightening the water's shimmer, damp garments were lifted and twisted, dry with practiced strength. Lines were strung between trees or posts, or even laid flat on bushes in the sun, where linens basked in golden light and breezes. These communal washings were not just about cleanliness. They were a kind of social fabric. And when the work was done and the last cloth was folded, the group would disperse. Tired, damp, so now, as you rest beneath your own blanket, imagine that stream, babbling softly in the background. Take, for instance, the washing bat, sometimes called a beetle or dolly stick. Then there was the scrubbing board. Though rarer in earlier centuries, some households had primitive versions. Planks of wood grooved with knife or chisel, often handmade. Soap itself was an art. Crafted from ashes and fat, cured for weeks, and sliced into crude blocks. And then there were the washing tubs. Large, wooden, barrel-shaped containers, often patched and reinforced over the years. Lye buckets stood in corners, dangerous but essential. And of course, one cannot forget the baskets. Woven with skill from willow, hazel, or reed, their frames strong and flexible. In colder months, heated pressing stones might be used to smooth the linens. All of these tools, the bat, the board, the bucket, the basket, were extensions of the launderer's hands. So now, as you lie in your own soft bed, wrapped in smooth cloth and gentle silence, imagine those old tools resting quietly by the hearth. Let the rhythm of the bat, the swirl of soap and water, and the creak of the basket lull you. In the 17th century, a home's linen cupboard was not merely a place to keep cloth. It was a quiet sanctuary of order, pride, and subtle fragrance. Linen was not cheap or easy to come by. The cloth, once dried in open air, was shaken gently to loosen the stiffness, then folded by hand, corner to corner, with practiced precision. To protect the linen from dampness and pests, it was lined with dried herbs and flowers. The linen chest itself, often made of thick, dark wood, bore marks of time and tenderness. For many women, maintaining the linen cupboard was a source of deep pride. Even the order mattered. Everyday linens were placed at the top, worn ones at the back, and so, as you imagine this quiet moment in the past, picture a humble room, the late sun glancing off the wood grain of a linen chest. Sleep now, knowing that in centuries past, people too found comfort in small acts of care. They folded not just linens, but memories, responsibilities, and love into those soft white bundles. Their world may have been harsher, their work harder, but in this peaceful moment, there was quiet joy. It demanded planning, supplies, space, and the right weather. And so, the day before the wash, or sometimes even two, was spent preparing. Long before water boiled and soap suds froth, before the heavy tubs were hauled outside or to the hearth, before even the village rooster stirred, there was a hush. The home was still dark, the walls cold, but her footsteps were soft, almost reverent, as she moved through the quiet house. A sacred silence that marked the start of laundry day. A morning filled with movement, but not yet with sound. In the 17th century, laundry wasn't simply a task, it was an event. It was a communal wash day, as it often was in villages. She might call to her neighbor, exchanging soft greetings across the garden hedge, both women bearing heavy loads and shared understanding. Or perhaps her daughter would help, dragging a stool to reach the higher shelves, yawning as she handed down a stack of crumpled chemises, sometimes with hands on hips, sometimes with a sigh. But in the calm of this early hour, the preparation held its own poetry. A dance of instinct, of memory, of love for a home that would soon smell of steam, soap, and sunshine. A moment to breathe. To look around her quiet home, what was once noise. The splash of water, the creak of wrung cloth, the rhythm of scrubbing boards, slowly fades into stillness. The women, their aprons damp and shoulders tired, gather the final pieces from the line with hands softened by steam and sun. Each shirt, carefully creased and stacked, tells a story of effort. Each towel carries the memory of the hands that washed it, wrung it, dried it. The cloths, no longer stiff with grime, no longer damp with rinse water, carry only a comforting weight. Soft, finished, peaceful, to feel the weight of the day ahead and the satisfaction of being ready for it. A child might lay his head against a freshly folded chemise, inhaling the scent of safety. Their hands rest in their laps, their backs lean against stone steps. The soaps are set to dry, the wringers cleaned. The clothespins return to their baskets, and the lines themselves slacken in the breeze like tired arms. Let the warmth of this imagined past settle over your shoulders like a freshly dried blanket. And tonight, across the centuries, we remember their quiet efforts, their patient hands, their small victories. Let the memory of steam and soapstone, of aproned women and evening breezes, rock you gently toward sleep. Perhaps one sips a final mug of ale or broth. Another hums a lullaby learned from her own mother, now long past. There is no rush. There is only the after. The still warmth after hard work, the gentle victory of domestic life completed. Another might help stack small kerchiefs into a chest, their movements clumsy but proud. These would be shaved into flakes and added later to the wash. And as lamps are lit in nearby homes, their orange flicker dancing on window panes, a sense of quiet pride fills the air. Today, everything was scrubbed, rinsed, wrung, and aired. Tomorrow, it will all be worn again. But tonight, the work is done. Others might use balls of soapwort root, a sudsy plant that foamed gently when boiled. Then the copper cauldron or iron pot was filled with clean well water, bucket by bucket, each slosh echoing in the early quiet. Too much wind could steal a cloth. Too little sun would slow the drying. A whisper of warmth carried only by well-used cloth. Dresses are shaken gently, sleeves fluttering like wings. Woolens are laid flat, their fibers still warm to the touch. And under the shade of an old plum tree, the folding begins. Slowly, mindfully, as if tucking away the day itself. A perfect laundry day was a balance. Warm, clear, kind. If she had ashes from the fireplace, they would be sifted and set aside to make lye water, the household's as harsh but trusted detergent, born of fire and patience. Before sunrise on laundry morning, a quiet figure might rise from her straw-filled mattress, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and lighting a taper from the hearth's last embers. She would gather the laundry, lifting baskets from corners, unhooking shirts from pegs, bundling napkins into cloths tied with string. Each item was inspected for tears, stains, or embroidery that needed shielding. Delicate lace might be wrapped in linen, and woolen set aside to avoid shrinking. The fire would be built with intention, not haste. First, kindling, then logs. Some women brewed their own gentle soaps, mixing animal fat with ashes, stirring slowly, cooling into hardened cakes. Outdoors, she would inspect the weather, watching the sky, the breeze, the bend of the tree branches. Lines were strung between trees or along fences, wooden pegs laid out in a bowl. If she was lucky, her older children might still be asleep, giving her a moment of quiet strength before the chaos. And then, only when everything was in place, only when the water was steaming and the tubs were ready, would she pause. It is easy, from the present, to forget how noble these tasks were. So as you rest now, picture her, candlelit and calm, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek as she readies the pot, smooths the cloth, and nods gently to herself in the dawn stillness. As the sun sinks low and long golden fingers of evening light creep across the cobbled courtyard, the bustle of laundry day begins to hush. The linens now smell of air, a mix of smoke from nearby chimneys, the faint green of meadow breezes, and something else. It is not merely folding, but caring, a ritual in reverse. Children drift close, sleepy from a day spent playing in the grass and chasing shadows between the fluttering sheets. And the women, the washerwomen, the housewives, the daughters and grandmothers, sit for a moment beneath the now empty clotheslines. The wash basins are emptied, their cloudy water poured back into the earth, nourishing roots beneath the garden. By now, the sky is lavender blue, dotted with the first early stars. So now, dear listener, allow your own thoughts to fold like those linens, gently, neatly, without weight. In every age, people have found peace in routine, even in the humble wash. Now, close your eyes. The wash is done. The fire is low, and all is calm again. Good night, dreamer. You've traveled far, and you've arrived in the quietest part of the past,